This is My Taste is Better Than Yours, the manga podcast where Guardian Enzo and I, Samu, discuss some of our favourite series and figure out, is my taste better than yours? Hello, hello, hello. Thank you everybody for joining us once again for My Taste is Better Than Yours. This is an episode that we plan to get out quite quickly in an opportune moment, and we have come together to discuss My Hero Academia. But before that, Enzo, how are you doing over in lovely, very sunny, very hot Kyoto, Japan?
Well, we're boiling. It's every day in Kyoto in this summer, particularly, is just awful. 40 degrees centigrade and humid, which is like 103 Fahrenheit. But I'm excited to talk about Boku no Hero Academia and almost a live broadcast, certainly the closest we've ever done. But I'm definitely in kind of a reflective mood and thinking about this series that's been really a constant companion of me, both as a fan and as a blogger for a decade. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, because we thought this there were no better time to get an episode out for this. Usually for these episodes, we record them quite a bit in advance and plan ahead, but the final chapter has just came out as of us recording, and yeah, like you said, Enzo, I know you've covered this series for a long, long time. I've also been reading it myself pretty much since it came out in the magazine, so it is a series that for both of us we have been on the full journey. And I mean, I'll give a brief synopsis. I'm sure everyone already knows about My Hero Academia, but for those who are unfamiliar, My Hero Academia is by Kohei Horikoshi, and it does publish in Weekly Shonen Jump. It started in 2014, and as of right now, it ended in 2024. So it just celebrated its 10-year anniversary as well. And very brief summary: this is a superhero story, but in different perspective, taking influences from Western comics, but we're getting it this time from the East, from manga. It's a world where almost everyone has these superpowers in the form of quirks that are quite unique to them and their personalities. And their main character, Izuku Midoriya, is quirkless, so he's one of the few people in society who doesn't have that benefit to make him stand out. Although he does want to be a hero, despite that, which begins his journey when he gains the attention of All Might, who's the number one hero in the country and the symbol of peace. And from there, from their bond, this unlocks a new potential, new side to him, finding these new inherited abilities that come from his relationship with All Might. And it really kicks off when it gets to his enrollment in the UA High School for Budding Heroes, where we meet all the members of his class, all of them with their own unique personalities, powers, and we follow Midoriya as well as everyone else on their journey. All the villains that get introduced along the way as well, explorations of all these themes that Kohei is clearly quite invested and interested in exploring, but while also being such a pure battle manga that is what you would associate, I think, especially with modern Weekly Shonen Jump. And it, from the offset, it pretty much became a hit. And I think it's fair to say it is one of the most defining and popular series of the 2010s and first half of the 2020s as well. Um, yeah, there's so much to say on the series. I actually don't want to give my initial first impressions right now. I think what we should do is discuss each of these elements of the series that we think are pertinent and that we want to get into deeply, and then at the end we'll round off with our thoughts because it's so fresh. It's just ended, and there's I think we can pick each other's brains and understand our different perspectives. But I mean, Enzo, do you want to touch on at least the experience of, I don't know, how many words have you put into My Hero
Yeah.
Academia over the years, do you
Well,
think?
this week was 150, episode 150. So I'm going to guess, probably based on my average, I may have done Probably 100,000 words. Um, something like that, and that's a lot. Probably more, actually, more like 1.2 million. Certainly more words on Boku no Hero Academia than any other series that I've covered on LIA. It's I've covered every season. Obviously, every season has been in my year-end top 10 list. Season 5 just made it, but it did still make it. And there's no other series that has been, in terms of volume, as big a part of what I've been doing as a writer. And I just feel a lot of like ownership of the series because you and I talked about it on a Random Curiosity podcast when the series had basically just started, and we were saying, keep an eye on this new series, Boku no Hero Academia, because we think it's going to be big. And so I feel like this is one of those series where you're you get on the elevator in the ground floor and you take it all the way to the roof, and when it ends it's a little bit of an emotional thing, and it is a little bit of an emotional thing for me to think about it now, after a 10-year journey with it. Absolutely.
Especially if you've essentially written a novel just on your
Yep.
thoughts and feelings in this series over
Yep.
a
Yep.
decade.
For sure.
I mean, you touched on that this, we kind of predicted, recognized. I don't want to give ourselves too much credit, but we thought it was going to be a hit, and it did turn out to be a hit pretty short into its run. I will say before then, just as a little context or history lesson for the author Kohei Horikoshi, this is actually his third series in Weekly Shonen Jump. Before then, he did several one shots, but also Omagadoki Zoo, which ended up as 5 volumes. And shortly before My Hero Academia, he did Barrage, which was 2 volumes. And that one did receive an English official print release as well, I believe. I have read his first series, Omagadoki Zoo. I read that around the time it came out, and I thought it's interesting to compare his style back then to how it evolves with My Hero Academia. But it is worth noting that he is a case of the authors who didn't have success immediately. And there is kind of this unspoken rule agreement, I believe, that the 3 strikes and you're out rule with rookies in the magazine. If you have 3 cancelled manga, it's very rare that you see them again, trying again. Sometimes it can be that rule can bend if they're just an artist or just a writer, but if like in this case he did all the work, then yeah, sometimes you see them disappear or you see them change magazines or publishers, whatever like that. 2 questions for you then, Enzo. Were you familiar with any of his work before My Hero Academia? And just to jump back onto our predictions, what do you think that we saw in the series that recognized it as you like to say, the future kaiju that it became?
Well, I was familiar with. I am familiar with the Zoo series, which I read, but only after Hero Academia came out, and I got curious about it. So this was fairly early in the run of Hero Academia, so it's been many years now since I read the Zoo series. But I enjoyed it. But it's clearly not anywhere near in the same league as Boku no Hero Academia is, and I think that one of the things that makes Boku no Hero Academia really really work is, I think, more effectively than maybe any other manga that's ever been written. It really authentically melds a Western comic book perspective with a Japanese manga style. And I made a note of this as I was, reading or watching this episode, actually, but also reading. I read a lot of chapters to get up to date with this, because I had kind of intentionally stopped so I would be surprised when I was watching the last season or two of the anime. But I did finish the manga for this. But you find a lot of characters in the series, like All Might and All for One, talk about how much they love comics, and they're not taught. They don't say manga, because sometimes you see manga translated as comics, they say komiku. They actually say comics, and they're talking about American superhero comics. And I think that reflects the fact that Horikoshi's big influence, in addition to Star Wars, which we can also talk about, but was American superhero comics. And because of that, I think he brought a tremendous authenticity in really lovingly yet somewhat critically taking the American comic book perspective and putting it through a manga lens. And I think one of the things, in addition to the fact that he's just a really good writer and a really good artist when he's not suffering from fatigue, is that he really authentically melded the comic book and battle shonen, those two perspectives, very, very effectively. I think that's one very important reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Battle Shonen because one of his major influences as well clearly is manga, um, particularly the big three that came before him. So this is One Piece, Bleach, and Naruto. Throughout his entire career, we've seen him interacting with the creators of those works and being very vocal that those were a significant part of his childhood and influence in being in Weekly Shonen Jump because of them. And I think you can see, there's one in particular, Naruto, I would say, where there is a lot of influence. But all of them, he's taken things, and yeah, to me, it still feels very much like a Weekly Shonen Jump battle manga, while, as you say, incorporating these influences, these Western influences as well. I think there's so many elements of the series, even beyond what the series is itself, that we could discuss. Let's tap into like the reputation the series has over the years.
Yep.
Probably, probably not too much of a stretch to say it has quite a passionate fan base. Um,
Yeah.
Amongst them, lovers, critics, haters. Um, it's a complicated. It's funny, I would whenever I read My Hero Academia, I have my thoughts and feelings about it. Probably, I mean they're positive, but maybe a bit lower than you, which we can get into. But I feel like whenever any given event or chapter or something happens, there's no agreement on anything about how good or bad it was for the characters, for the arcs, how much Horikoshi is betraying his
Yeah.
characters, and maybe this comes as well with the age of some of his fan base and how it does appeal to quite, I don't know, young teens, people who are growing up with the series. That I feel like they almost infantilize some of the characters and the concepts, and when they see Horikoshi doing things that is extremely common in manga, let's just say like fan service. What Horikoshi does in My Hero Academia, to me, I don't know. It is so minimal compared to what any
Absolutely.
not even just the magazine, but just in general. Whereas I can see so many times where it's become a controversy that he's made a decision or he's depicted a character in some way. And I get it. Those things can be annoying and just like not what we were after when we're getting into the series. But it's a funny one where you just see people who are meant to be fans or who claim to be fans sometimes also being the most vocal against it. I don't know. Back in my day when I was a young teen who had my battle shonen series Bleach was a series that got pretty aggressively critiqued and attacked by people who didn't like it. But the
Mm.
fans, even if we had our own thoughts and feelings, at least we stood behind the series and we like tried to be
Yeah.
positive amongst ourselves. Well,
Yeah.
what do you think in that? Do you think that the fan base for My Hero Academia is unique in that way, or is it just this weird amalgamation of I don't know all these factors coming in to play?
Um, I have thoughts. I would say, first of all, you hear people say all the time, "Oh, big Weekly Shonen Jump, Shonen manga, the big three, they all have negative fan bases." And I get that there are negative elements in the fan bases of all the major Shonen Jump monsters. Even like Hunter x Hunter with the Togashi Dragon Quest people. But I think personally that the Hiroaka fan base is the most relentlessly negative of any of the major Shonen Jump Kaibutsu series, the monsters. And it's relentlessly negative to the point where I just find it depressing. I don't think I don't think that the fan base for Hero Academia skews any younger than it does for any of the other major Weekly Shonen Jump Battle Shonen when they were in their prime. So if there is anything that's unique to the Hero Academia fan base that you can chalk up the negativity to, I don't think it's age. It would have to be generational as opposed to the time they were that age that they are rather than the age itself. And I don't really think that's it either. Because I don't think, for example, that the Kimetsu or JJK fan bases are anywhere near as negative as the Hero Academia fan base is. Now, Kimetsu is kind of an odd case because that fan base is probably more Muggle than any other major Shonen Jump series, with the possible exception of One Piece. So, it may be that My Hero Academia appeals more to a hardcore otaku fan than the typical Shonen Jump Battle Kaibutsu series does. I'm not saying it does. That could be one possible explanation for it, and that those people are generally speaking more critical than more passionate in both directions, maybe. I don't know. What I do know for sure is, in my opinion, there's absolutely no question that this fan base is more negative than most. I think they've tended to just rip everything apart. You really, it's kind of the opposite of that old "your mom said if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything." It seems to be kind of the opposite with Hiroaka fans a lot of the time. The only time they ever say anything is if it's negative. You don't hear people saying how much they love the series, and yet, in an extraordinary way, the volume sales for the manga have actually trended up in the last several volumes, which for a series of this age is extremely rare. And in fact, the opening box office for the fourth movie has been better than any of the first three. So there's clearly a lot of positivity towards the series in terms of the pocketbook. Clearly, the fan base is loyal, but they
Do you think
seem
this
to
is
love
unique to the
expressing.
Western fans?
No, 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 no. Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. It's the Japanese fan base too. No question about it. I see it. It's not unique to Western fans at all. I do think that possibly because it is so clearly influenced by comic books that it maybe proportionally has more of its fan base in the West. It's huge in Japan, but it's closer to hugeness in, like, say, America than it is to the Japan hugeness than most. Like, for example, Bleach is huge in Japan. It's big in America, but the gap is wider. With Hiroaka, I think the gap is narrower between its domestic fan base and its overseas fan base than it is with most series. That could have something to do with it.
Yeah, I think the ratio is definitely closer. Even in terms of just volume sales, the way that it's able to perform overseas is consistently impressive. Like you said, volumes have, if they've never really dipped, they've remained consistent or improved throughout the run, depending on whatever is happening in the series at a given time. And it's a similar story with the table of contents rankings as well. Generally, it has remained very near the top, and I think this past year is the only time where it has dipped. But I don't know if that's necessarily indicative of anything to do with how the series is viewed or the quality that they think the series is at right now. I think it is maybe more just a matter of fact that it is coming to its end, and this is the magazine in a way allowing it to step down while also uplifting the new series that will take its place. Yeah, it's a unique fan base, but thankfully, I feel like at the place where with a lot of the series that I read or anime that I watch, I try and stay away, or I can stay away from the messy in and out fan base, like fandom debates that happen. I've that era has come and gone for me with all the series that did apply to. um, I think potentially the people who were in or are in this situation right now with My Hero Academia, give them 5, 10 years, maybe a positive spin is with reflection, they will think maybe it wasn't that deep that you needed to go that crazy over your takes about the series and just some of the things they would say about Horikoshi as an author. Just just strange. And it's funny, like you say, this is people who love the series. There are also just people who don't like the series and are critical of it. I would say there are people who are super critical of it in ways that feel a little bit extreme to me. But I am also one of those people who I have some issues with the series. So yeah, we can get into that. But before that, I just also wanted to say maybe more of a question for you. Um, how do you think My Hero Academia stacks compared to those other Weekly Shonen Jump hits, whether it be battle manga or just popular titles from the magazine? Does it have
Yeah.
that defining quality that makes it stand out? Like, where do you think it falls?
Years and years ago when we had that original podcast, what I said about it, as I predicted, as you did, its success is, I thought that, critically speaking, I thought that Horikoshi's next series after this would be a masterpiece. That was what I was getting out of it. And now that we've come to the end of it after 10 years, I kind of think he achieved it. And like you, I think he achieved it here actually. And while like you, I have some issues with the series. Over 10 years and 400 and some chapters, you're always going to have issues with a series. That's just the way it is. I think it's the best battle shonen since Hunter x Hunter in Weekly Shonen Jump. I think it's better than any of the so-called
Wow.
big three by a comfortable margin. But I'm not a fan of any of the big three, so that's me. I don't dislike any of them, but I think Hero Acas thematically is deeper, more interesting, more challenging, more complex, more ambitious artistically, and I also say it's more artistically ambitious than the big monster series that have followed it, like Jujutsu Kaisen and Kimetsu. I think you take a series like Tokyo Ghoul, I think is very ambitious. I'll give it credit, although I think it flamed out and failed. Uh, while Boku and Hero Academia just kind of kept going. And I know not everyone loves the ending, and we'll talk about the ending. But I think one of the most remarkable aspects of My Hero Academia is how consistent it's been over the course of 430 chapters. I mean, there are some arcs that have been better than others, but on the whole, he's had some health issues and stuff, and some 8-page chapters, and a lot of breaks, and clearly times when he was struggling. But in terms of the artistic merit, I think he's been remarkably successful at keeping it level. I think it's been very consistent for 10 years, and I think that's one of its most remarkable achievements.
Okay, well, okay, I did actually have a question, so I'm gonna maybe ask you to dig a bit deeper because this is coming from a perspective of someone who, if I'm being completely honest, I don't view My Hero Academia as particularly better in any aspect to its contemporaries or even to older battle shonen series. I when I think of My Hero Academia, I don't know if I can think of what is the thing that defines it or makes it better than the other series. Like you say, consistency, but
Okay.
okay. If I give other examples, so for Bleach, if I was to just narrow down to one thing, Bleach, I would say it harnesses the power of just being insanely cool and how the artwork portrays the characters, the designs, the fights, the visual aesthetic of it. One Piece, I would
Okay.
say the depth of the world building and how much clear effort has been put into this entire concept, everything that Oda is putting into the series behind the
Okay.
scenes. And then even, I don't know, Hunter x Hunter, there are many things, but the
Yes.
sheer detail of which Togashi is able to almost reinvent himself with each arc and how he approaches the series. I don't know what I could put from My Hero
Okay.
Academia personally.
I think that's a fair question. I would say for Hunter x Hunter, for me, I think as soon as you raised the subject, the first thing that jumped to mind for me with Hunter x Hunter is ruthlessness. Just the sheer lack of plot armor and boundaries. But what is it about Boku no Hero Academia? If you want something more narrative based than consistency, I would say, and you may consider this still a cop out, but I think it fits. I think balance, because I think it it has It never errs too far in any direction. It balances light and dark. It balances the comic book and the manga mentality, the Eastern and Western philosophy of the superhero genre. It has lots of subtext and lots of depth, but it doesn't feel ponderous and heavy. It has space for tournament arcs, and it has space for almost Togashi like arcs with like the Dark Hero arc. It elevates villains to interesting status without them being excused or being sanctified, because it never lets you lose sight of how evil they are. Um, with a couple of exceptions where he maybe toes the line a little bit on that, but generally speaking, so that's what I would say is its ability to nimbly be so many different kinds of things without ever seeming to go too far in any one extreme. I would say that's something that stands out for me as a notable element of it.
So you'd say it's kind of more like this generalist approach of how he's tackling everything, as opposed
I
to.
think so.
I've always
Yeah,
just
I
found it
think
quite
so.
curious because I found it curious because I know that you've always liked and or loved the series any given point, and I've liked the series for almost all of it. But like I said, I've never saw what made it so different from the battle shonen subgenre that I love. But the fact that you don't necessarily love that subgenre, but that you felt so passionate about My Hero Academia, I always thought that was quite an interesting difference of opinion we had. So yeah, no, just
May
a bit
I may I
curious.
interject something here? May I interject something real quick on
Please,
that front?
please go.
And one of the things that I know we were going to talk about at some point was our favorite arcs of the series. So I'm going to just segue into that, because let me first all start out with the Hero Killer Stain, which is my favorite arc of the series. Because I don't
That's quite
think
early.
it is, but it's an early arc, but he never forgets it, though. You see, thematically, it's an important arc that keeps reappearing in some form or another all the way through the rest of the series, pretty much. But honestly, I don't think there's another mangaka who could have written the Stain arc. I think the Stain arc is like a perfect deconstruction of the hero villain conundrum as he presents it in this series of the fragility and the hollowness. See, I think when I talk about his deftness and how nimble he is, I think this is it, because he manages to really, in effect, through Stain, who is the most charismatic villain in the series and possibly the most charismatic character in the series, even, he manages to effectively rip his entire mythology to threads, to shreds. The whole hero mythology, as it's set up here, the quirk system. Stain, he doesn't refute anything he has Stain say. He pretty much acknowledges that Stain is right about almost everything, and yet he does it without making you lose faith and lose belief and lose desire to see the system work, to believe in it the way that Deku believes in it. And that's the magic that Horikoshi is able. That's the sorcery. He can do that. He can have it both ways, and not many writers can do that the way he can. And that's why I think the elegance and beauty of that arc, it perfectly suits his best qualities as a writer. I think to a certain extent, I think that's true with the Dark Hero arc too, because uh, certainly at the heart of My Hero Academia is Izuku. I mean, he's the son that every parent wishes they had, except that he would just drive you crazy with worry nonstop. And he takes him in this arc and he puts him in a dark place, and he doesn't sell Deku's pain short, and he doesn't sell his journey short, and he shows it to you in all of its ugliness and all of its agony and all of its doubt and all of these things, and he takes you to the depths of hell with Deku, and then at the end of it, you realize that Deku is still Deku. He hasn't lost who he is, and he never lost who he is, even through all of that. And you see, you may be skeptical of it, but that to me is that's what the element that sets him apart is that ability to never go too far in the one direction that he cuts himself off from what he is essentially. He's able to do both at the same time, and that I think is a particular form of genius with Hiroaka. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I don't. What I will say, and I will give him credit for, is the attention to detail that he puts into the villains of the series. I feel like we see their perspective fleshed out so much compared to maybe other battle shonen in that way, and we stick with them for so long of a time, and how their perspective mirrors or is contrast to the heroes, and I think in a lot of ways their point of view is valid in their critiques of what they're bringing up. Yeah, I think the villains particularly are very interesting. Maybe the way that it resolves them is kind of, I think, sometimes the easy way out. Not necessarily a cop out, but I feel like things are brought up that can go quite deep into different perspectives, and maybe there's a lot of bows being neatly wrapped in order to move on to the next point. On that though, I was going to say, since you mentioned favorite arcs, a few that come to mind for me, if I'm talking about an early one, that would be the sports festival arc, the tournament. That I feel like is
Mm.
maybe the point in the series where it leveled up and the reputation it had, and it garnered even more fans than it already did in that first segment of the series, which I think aligned with season two in the anime. That I also think is when it really started to um, get that boost. I think other ones that come to mind for me are I do like the Dark Hero arc, and um, actually, it's probably the Paranormal Liberation War arc. So not this
Mm.
final one that we had, but the one just before it. I
Mm.
feel like that was the one where makes me think even now. I don't know if we needed two war arcs in that way. I feel like what he was trying to do with the series, so much of it was successful the first time around that didn't work for me. And if I can segue then into critiques that we have in the series, and I'm gonna ask you, and so you have to come up with a couple of critiques because I can probably come up
Mm.
with a few more than you. But I would say in general, the final saga, excluding the Dark Hero arc, um, I feel like he lost his way. If I'm completely honest, there are a lot of people who say genuine people who don't enjoy the series or that did like it and then became haters. I feel like maybe they checked out a little bit earlier than that, maybe sometime around the Skull Festival arc, somewhere around there. I feel like there was a shift after the Paranormal Liberation War arc where, to me, so many things could have been resolved there if he wanted to take that approach. But what came after felt to me like an extension, and the way he went about things wasn't always successful. I don't want to be super spoilerific in this portion of the of the discussion, but to say the Star and Stripe section of the story, I think that was just thoroughly disappointing in how that character was introduced, handled, and then just gone. I think that was quite annoying, if I'm honest. I think the final war arc, which I think did end up becoming the longest in the entire series, to me, I there were there are big pivotal moments. One of which I believe at the time of recording is in one of the latest episodes with Bakugo. That was a big moment that happened, and I'll always remember that. And there were several others scattered throughout that arc, but I think both narratively it felt quite rushed, and also I don't like using this critique because I think he's an excellent artist. I feel like things became visually messy at some point. I don't. It's hard to pinpoint when exactly this happened, but from reading it week to week, I remember thinking I'm genuinely struggling to make out what is happening panel to panel sometimes because he becomes, if it's such a thing, he becomes too creative in how he's portraying the action that it muddles the visual clarity. And I think that only got worse throughout the war arc. So just even on level of trying to on one read of each chapter, trying to pick up every detail that was being put across.
Right.
I found it quite difficult. In the way that some people critique One Piece, that over the years it started off quite simplistic in its paneling and artwork. Then, because of the density of it, the panels get smaller, the text becomes bigger. So much is happening on these double spread pages. I feel like My Hero Academia and Horikoshi kind of had a similar journey in the latter part of the series. So that's my critiques. If I was to focus on a few, um, curious to hear what you think of those and also
Well,
your own.
well, when we're ready to talk about the ending soon, I will have some critiques about that. Uh, but I will say also, I
Okay,
think you as a critic are particularly tough on endings. I think, but I think generally speaking, fans are tough on endings because guess what? Endings are hard. Um, that said, if I'm going
it
to
can make and break a series. To me, a good ending on an otherwise mediocre series means that I will remember the series more fondly.
yeah.
Personally,
Well, for the record, we haven't talked about the ending yet. For the record, I think it is a good ending, but we'll get there. I think a more general critique for me, you know, I would say I agree with you that he tends to get a little over detailed in his art sometimes, to the point where it does get a little bit busy. And I don't disagree with that assessment. I do think that occasionally becomes a problem. Um, I also think he has a tendency to, because he is so good at what I've called the series' great strength. His great strength is of doing of having it both ways, of managing to do two things at once that are seemingly contradictory without them canceling each other out. He tends to overreach sometimes a little bit, to try to do things a little too comprehensively, to not leave any stone unturned and not leave any bow untied. So if I was going to come up with a more general critique, I think that would be it. That I do think he tends to try to resolve too much sometimes. So that's my main critique of the series, really. Although, again, when we talk about the ending, is when I think we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail.
what I do want to mention though, before we get into spoiler section, there are a couple other points. Um, there is a character who does get a lot of criticism, and I think for a lot of people would be a main point of critique, and that's Deku, the main character. And this is one case where I just could not disagree more. I think Deku, while I say that My Hero Academia for me is not one of the best series in the past decade from the magazine, compared even to other Battle Shonen, I do think Deku is one of the best main characters of the magazine and has been for the past 10 years. I think he just encapsulates so much of what the series is about, the morality that it's not pushing but embracing. And I, whenever I see some people reacting to the series, um, ironically, I think it's different people maybe than those who are the passionate fans sometimes. I don't know. I don't know if you think it is, but people who see Deku and can only complain about his thoughts and feelings and the direction that he takes the series by his point of view that he has, and I don't know. I don't think he's in that way that different from the morally good main character that is very common in these battle shonen series to help ground it and make it feel like it doesn't get lost in the gloom and the darkness and the death. You need that character who is that light, however that light may shine upon the other characters. You that's almost always the case with Weekly Shonen Jump. I don't know if Deku just shines his light too brightly and too often for people. But genuinely, that is a point where I've never got the hate, never once. So
Mm. I
quite
think
over
he comes
multiple
by
times.
his. I think he is in a sense, he's too positive, I suppose, for some people, but he comes by it honestly. You never feel it's forced. You never feel it's put on. You never feel it's manufactured. I think he is a very genuine person, and I think his motivation to do what he does is as honest as any character you could ever want. And I think the idea that that was what eventually drew All Might to him, I think it fits perfectly. I think it's extremely there's a lot of pathos to him. And again, I think that's why the Dark Hero arc works so well, is because of all the legwork that Horikoshi did in building up that character over the course of so long. So yeah, I agree. I mean, if you have no problem with Tanjiro and you have a problem with Deku, I think you ought to kind of maybe rethink this whole manga thing. That would be my take on that. Uh, but that's a whole other argument. But I mean, I just think Deku is a great protagonist. I think he's fantastic. I get that there are a lot of people who don't like him, uh, and I think the crybaby thing that bothered some people, but it got to the point where it's like that became a character trait that was important in the story. Even it's not like Horikoshi was ignoring it. I mean, he acknowledged it and he addressed it. So again, I think everything about Deku is honest, including the way he's written, and I think that's why he's a great protagonist.
Hmm, hmm. Ironically, the character who is the most popular in the series, Bakugo, I've never got the appeal. I found him annoying in the beginning. I found him annoying at the end. He has his
Yeah,
moments of coming to, I don't know. He definitely has a character arc. Um, but I think of another character, and this is Ace of Diamond. He reminds me of the co-protagonist of that series, where it
Furuya.
took too long. Yeah, it took too long to just get to the point. I feel like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that was being made.
I can
And
see
then
that.
if I was to highlight
I
another character that I'm not 100% on either, is Endeavour. I think that was a lot for
oh,
Horikoshi to tackle. Um, and I think he was generally
interesting,
successful, but I still walk away with
interesting.
it with complicated feelings. Though I appreciate the inclusion of the different perspectives that his family have of him and how it all creates this bigger picture, and especially his the eldest son, I believe. But
Yeah.
he's always been a character that I've felt at an emotional arm's distance from, just because of the intention of how he was introduced and what the point of his character even was to begin with.
Interesting. Well, I agree with
Yeah.
you about Bakugo, who I did. He grew on me over the course of the series. I kind of reached a flashpoint with him where I realized how smart he was, and he just acted stupid, but he still did keep acting stupid, and that still did keep annoying me. So I did find him generally the least endearing of all the major characters on the student side. I do like the Endeavor character. I don't like Endeavor as a person. I think he's a horrible bastard. But I do actually think as a character, I think he works very well. But that's just difference of opinion on that. I also think another character that I really do like is Twice. I think Twice is again, it's a villain character, and the villain characters get a lot of love from Horikoshi. But I think Twice, right from the minute he's introduced, is really interesting, and he adds such a completely unique and different perspective on the whole villain point of view. I thought he was great, and I appreciated the fact that Horikoshi never forgot about Twice or Stain. They both were important characters right up until the very end, and I appreciated that he did that, because I think they're both really, really very interesting and very well drawn characters.
I was going to pick your brain about one thing leading into the spoiler discussion. I know for the longest time you did read the series and then you switched to covering the anime and then you went over both, I believe. For this episode that we're covering now, you did have to catch up with manga.
Yep, yep.
How do you think? Because I'm someone, I only watched the first two seasons of the anime, and I felt the you just I don't know if the aesthetic, the super colorful aesthetic, even though it's a bold choice, I don't know if it always felt like what I saw in the manga. So that's why I stuck to just reading the source material. Personally, I think that is the better version of the series. But how do you feel as someone who's experienced pretty much both for their entire run? And then also, have you read any of the spin offs as well? Are they worth it?
Yeah, I read Vigilantes, which I think is quite excellent actually. And I was very surprised it never got an adaptation because I think it's very good and it was relatively popular too. So I was surprised that never got an anime. But um, I basically stopped, around chapter 300, and I said, okay, I'm gonna wait, and because I want to have a fresh perspective on the anime now, because I knew I was always going to be covering the anime, and I wanted the anime. I'll be an anime first person until the series ends. But in order to do this broadcast, I ended up basically marathoning the last couple of arcs of the manga. So which is the better version? Well, I would say that there are times when the anime clearly struggles because the production team is overtaxed because they were working on a movie at the same time that they were working on the TV show, and there are times when that shows. The times when that's not the case, I actually, by a small margin, actually prefer the anime. I think because I think it cleans up some of what you talk about with Horikoshi's tendency to. I think he does tend to rush things sometimes, and he does tend to be a little bit uh, overzealous with some of his visual narrative. And I think the anime cleans that up in ways that makes it flow more smoothly than the manga does at those times. I think generally speaking, the voice casting in the anime is excellent. I think Otsuka Akio as All for One is phenomenal, but I think that most of the casting on the anime side is excellent. Um, by a small margin, I prefer the anime, except for the times when the anime is clearly struggling because of the movie production, which thankfully does not seem to have happened with the fourth movie because there hasn't been any period where I've seen the anime visibly struggling as a result of that. So, but on balance, I think remarkably close. I don't think I can say one version is definitively better than the other. I think they're actually quite close.
Nice. Okay, so I think we had a lot to talk about. Just looking over the totality of the series on a general level, this is going to be the brief spoiler section where we are going to just go fill in on our feelings on how it all wrapped up. So this is your warning there if you've not already read that. Um, yeah, Enzo, I'm curious to get your perspective. You've probably binged a good few dozen chapters in a row. How do you feel the war wrapped up, the epilogue itself that we managed to get, which is pretty rare in Weekly Shonen Jump Battle
Mm,
Series, that we
mm.
even got one altogether. Though, again, I've already seen people complain that it's not long enough. But yeah, thoughts and
Okay.
feelings. I'm curious.
I'll say first off, obviously don't listen at this point because the spoilers are big spoilers at this point. But so if you haven't read, watched, and have an interest in doing it, I mean, it should be implicit, but stop. But we didn't get a resolution on what I think is the most interesting elephant in the room, which is Deku's father, which disappointed me. I'll say that up front. I thought there would at least be some
Yeah.
acknowledgement there. But right up to the very last moment, it never even gets, as far as I remember, never even gets acknowledged, even indirectly. Which, for someone as meticulous as Horikoshi is at crossing his T's and dotting his I's, although you don't do that in Japanese, but you get my point. It's surprising, almost feels like that omission is a commission, like he's doing that intentionally for some reason, that he's totally ignoring that aspect of it, and I don't know why he did. Be that as it may, let's set that aside. The war arc, I think it's actually, I knew that I wasn't spoiled. The only thing I was spoiled on was the Bakugo's seeming death, because that image was all over social media. You couldn't avoid it when it happened. Um, but generally speaking, I was not spoiled with how the series ended. I did appreciate the fact that that after 425 chapters, he gave himself 5 chapters or so to really do a proper epilogue, which a series like this desperately needs. A coda, if you will, is what I like to call it, and we got our coda. So, thank you, Horikoshi Sensei, for doing that. Um, my issues with the ending fall mainly into that old issue we've talked about of him trying to do too much, and I feel like he was too eager to bring back every character who had some role in the story at some point and give them a role in the finale. And I appreciate the impulse of it, but I think a little restraint would have worked here. We didn't need to see every character have a significant role in the war arc, and pretty much every character did. I would have stepped back from that. Um, as far as Deku himself, I was kind of okay there with what happened with him. He effectively, as Gon in Hunter x Hunter did, he did what he had to do, and he lost his Nen, and that's kind of what happened to Deku. Is he did what he had to do, and he lost his quirk. He did keep embers, as they call them in the series, of One for All. But and then we had a little epilogue that calls that into question. But so I was kind of okay with that because I felt like I was very sad that he wasn't fulfilling that predestination of being the number one hero. But the counterpoint to that is that he was the number one hero when it really mattered, and I think he knew that, and I think that's why he was kind of at peace with his new role, which was being a teacher, being a mentor. I like the fact that Eraser was like, I wish you wouldn't be so kind to the students, because that's exactly the kind of teacher that Izuku would be. He would be too nice, and the students would love him, but he would never be good at disciplining them, and because that's just who he is. Um, you know, I would say I wasn't to- I thought, as much as I love All Might, and I do love All Might as a character, I I thought his arc would have had a little more poetry to it if he had moved on in the end. And I thought that would have been a little bit. I think maybe Horikoshi made things a little too neat on the hero side, even though there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of maiming and wounding and psychological scarring, but it was maybe a little neater than it needed to be, and it was maybe I think he just tried to do too much. He didn't want to leave like any loose ends, and so I think he went overboard in trying to tie up loose ends. Except, as I said, for that one extremely obvious Gigantosaurus in the room, which he completely ignored to the point of not even acknowledging it indirectly. So that's kind of my take on the ending. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do think he was maybe. I think he was maybe too kind to too much of his cast and how he was going to resolve their stories. I do. I was expecting All Might to have a climactic end to his arc, the passing on. To, I felt like that was going to happen, and the fact that it didn't happen, it just leaves us with a missed opportunity for what could have been a really good send off that I think would have balanced well with this very positive final chapter and epilogue section that we have in the story. I don't think that would have diminished the final resolution that Horikoshi was clearly aiming for here. I do also think there was one double spread in the final chapter where, God, I feel like almost every chapter, every character got a panel just showing them. And it was almost too much where we're seeing so much, but on such a small scale that I'm not really feeling the impact of seeing these characters return, getting a glimpse of what their post epilogue life is like. Yeah, I feel like he was trying a lot, but it almost wasn't enough in what he was doing. If he limited it to other characters and um, nailed home some uh, more conclusions, I think that would have been more satisfying. I'm not too fussed as well on the shipping aspect of it. There are
Yeah, I was going to
Bakudeku
ask about
fans.
that. What was the fan reaction to that? Were they angry that there wasn't a lot of shipping resolution in the end? Because obviously, since I just really read this, I hadn't read up a lot of the fan reaction. Was there a lot of anger over there not being more shipping resolution in the end?
Definitely, 100%. I mean, whether it's Bakudeku or whether it's Deku and Uraraka, I felt like we were going to get some confirmation with Uraraka in the end. Just maybe like a final chapter thing because it's so common with these sorts of series that it
Sure,
happens just as a
sure.
conclusion. You know, Bakudeku, love you for all the fans who are clearly very obsessed on that
That's
level.
just for the
It,
Dojin people. That's a Comiket
it,
thing. That's a Comiket thing. That was never
it
going to
was not.
happen.
It was yeah. It was not going to happen. And if you have a genuine critique that that not happening is a negative to the
Yeah, that's
series,
no.
I don't know.
Sorry.
You just need to shift your perspective slightly. That's not necessarily
I was
anything of
disappointed
the
we didn't
series'
get
fault.
like a Deku. I thought we would get like a kiss or something between Deku and Ochako, though. I did think we'd get something there. You know, she admitted she loved him, but not to his face. You know, so
Yeah, it felt like that penultimate chapter could have been that moment, and I don't know. It just never happened. So, okay, one final point then I want to mention, which I think is relevant as well with the ending of the series and the announcement, is how do we feel about the idea of a sequel, whether that be, I'm going to use Naruto as a comparison, something which is more Shippuden and time skip a few years, or something that is more Boruto, which is generational. Did
right.
you do you think the series needs it? Did you expect it, or were you more looking forward to seeing Horikoshi move on to something different as his next series?
Well, let me tie it back to that comment I made all those years ago, what I already referenced of Horikoshi's next series is going to be his masterpiece. I do think he exceeded my expectations in the end with this one. So I think um, we again, as we're recording this, we don't know what that announcement is going to be, but there's something big Boku no Hero Academia related. So if it's a sequel, I'll certainly be interested. My first emotion is I hope he takes a break before he starts it because it's clear that the physical demands of this series were wearing him down. So I hope he takes a break no matter what he decides. Uh, if you ask me, I would rather see what he could do with a completely new mythology. I would rather see him come up with a completely new series because um, I think the ending on this one was pretty satisfying, and I feel like he left it in a good place. So I would be fine with it ending where it ended, and he moves on to something else. Maybe does a one shot or something in 5 years. You know, whatever would be great. I don't need Boruto, you know. I don't need a 1,000 year blood war. I would be perfectly fine with this going off, riding off into the sunset, and Horikoshi turning his genius towards a whole new idea. That's what I would rather see if it were up to me.
Yeah, I don't think I needed a sequel. I don't think I needed beyond what a lot of series, what a lot of mangaka end up doing. I think of Furudate for Haikyuu, who's done several one shots that are side stories, sequels to the series since then. I think that's what I envisioned as these sorts of
Hmm.
dipping the toe back into the world and giving another little taste of what could have been. But if we get a whole entire series, I'm not going to be disappointed. But
No,
yeah,
I won't be disappointed.
no, but I also agree. I was more curious to see a blank slate, to see what
Yeah,
Horikoshi could have come up with. And,
yeah.
I feel like he's going to be a working mangaka, hopefully for a long time. I also think he's going to be a Weekly Shonen Jump mangaka in the same way someone like Togashi is. This is what clearly he wanted. He wanted to be in this magazine, and so much of what he's done is emblematic of
Yeah.
like the battle shonen genre and everything that he's put into the series. So I think whether it's in a year, whether it's several years, I hope it's yeah. I look forward to seeing him come back.
He's earned the right
Yeah,
to do what he wants, how he wants to do it. He's earned that right. He's more than paid his dues. whatever you may think, even if you have critiques of him, he's given himself honestly and passionately for 10 years and consistently performed financially in a way that, that speaks volumes, literally, no pun intended, speaks volumes to his influence with the magazine. So whatever he decides, he's earned the right to do it. It's only a matter of saying what you would prefer, I would prefer. But and I agree with you. He is a Weekly Shonen Jump mangaka. This is what he is. This is his world. He's staked out his place in it, and I don't blame him for wanting to stay there. He's earned it.
And I think it's worth mentioning having some sort of side story, sequel, spin off, whatever that may be, staying in the world of this successful series that he has is a safer bet, I think, because in the world of Weekly Shonen Jump, you could be the veteran in the high heavens in terms of regard and esteem, but if you come back and your series is not performing, you will get cancelled. It happened with Kishimoto and Naruto when he came back with Samurai 8. That barely lasted around 50 chapters, I believe. There are lots of other examples. So, yeah, there's no guarantee that he's going to be another Matsui with his 3 hits in a row. So, yeah, there's also that to consider. But whatever he does, I look forward to seeing the future for Horikoshi. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all I was going to discuss. If you're all good, Enzo, we can jump over to recommendations then.
Yes, please do. You want me to
Yes,
go
so
first? You want me to go first?
I'll go first. So since we're talking about
Okay.
Weekly Shonen Jump, I feel like the most applicable series in many aspects is Kagurabachi by Takeru Hokazono. Now, it's funny thinking this because there's a lot of similarities, I think, in terms of spiritual successors in the magazine with battle manga in particular. For the past few years, people have been skeptical about the future of the magazine in terms of battle shonen. We didn't have necessarily a big hit coming out that could take up the mantle of One Piece, My Hero Academia, or Jujutsu Kaisen. I think for one, Sakamoto Days will take that place in one aspect, but Kagurabachi has come at a time that looks like it's going to slot right in there, especially with the ending of My Hero Academia. And I should note, My Hero Academia that started in 2014, which was it was around 20 chapters when Naruto ended, and I think Naruto has a lot of similarities to My Hero Academia in the same way that I see a lot of My Hero Academia in Kagurabachi, which is at 40 chapters. So they're at a similar point of inheriting being the next successor in this cycle. And if you want to throw in another series, I also think Hunter x Hunter goes before Naruto in terms of
Mm,
influence and that wave that is continued through those series. Now,
mm,
in that way, Kagurabachi feels like the series that I would say if you want a weekly Shonen Jump battle series that is hitting on all cylinders and is appealing to those sensibilities, that is the series that I think is worth investing your time into. There is already a fandom to it. It's growing and growing. The series is getting more popular both in the West and now in Japan. And yeah, I think especially at this point in the series where it's at now, 40ish chapters, it had, in my opinion, the first truly great chapter of the series. I think my opinion has shifted from it's fine to it's good, it's occasionally pretty good. I think it's finding its identity as a series. Which, if I was going to compare it to a particular arc, it would be the Dark Hero arc. It's very much a revenge plot line, and there is less levity and comedy than maybe your typical Weekly Shonen Jump battle series. It takes itself quite seriously. It's quite edgy in a teen way. I think that's why I think Dark Hero is maybe the most apt comparison. If you're like the tone of that, then Kagurabachi might be up there for you. And again, this is another chance to mention the series because this is one that we've never even covered, but it keeps coming up in discussions throughout all these episodes, and I think it is going to be around for quite a while. So one way or another, we're probably all going to experience it at some point. So Enzo, what about your recommendation?
Kagurabachi's one I tried a few chapters of and it did nothing for me. But I recognize that it is certainly going to be a hit. So at some point, I'll probably loop back to it and give it another shot. Um, I was tempted to say Hunter x Hunter here just because I do think, in many respects, as you sort of implied, you can draw a line that starts with Hunter x Hunter and goes straight through to My Hero Academia. I do think there's a definite connection there. But I ended up going with One Punch Man by One and Murata Yusuke. And although, as you pointed out to me, it is actually a sign-in, but I think there's a lot of, I think it has a lot of sort of spiritual overlap with My Hero Academia. I think there's a lot of kind of a sanguine deconstruction of the whole hero mythology and the sort of the pettiness and the hollowness of the hero myth. I think that if anything, One Punch Man is more cynical and darker. And I don't think there's any question that it is, but I think there is a certain shared interest in deconstructing the whole superhero comic, the American superhero comic mythology, which in many senses I think One Punch Man and My Hero Academia both do. So I would say One Punch Man it's a series that should overlap with My Hero Academia fans. I think they'd find a lot to like about it. It's also just a really good series. I mean, it's not the masterpiece of this team. We all know what that is. It's Mob Psycho 100, but it is very, very good. It's about as good as mainstream pulp superhero comics get in Japan, as far as I'm concerned. Occasionally gets a little full of itself, but also occasionally has really transcendent moments of greatness too. So I would say One Punch Man. That would be my pick as a recommendation.
That's one where I have been meaning to read the manga as well for a while. I've only watched the first season of the anime because I know that the second season was pretty lambasted in comparison to the
Woof.
quality. Yeah, so I kind of stopped at that point, and I do have intention of picking it up again. So I'm even, the series has just ended. It's still stewing in my brain. It might change. Maybe with more time, I will feel fonder of the series. But having read it weekly, especially the past few years throughout this final saga, this particularly the final war arc, there were times where it was a push for me, and it felt like the elements that I really enjoyed about the series, particularly the art, the clarity of it, I was losing that. I was losing my grip on the series. I think a lot of things were this weird balance of being rushed, but also too much is happening, but maybe not with the resolution that I want for certain characters. It's a weird, strange balance and an unfortunate uh, finale for a series that, in my opinion, I don't know, 75% of it, I really, really loved, or at least really liked. There are so many points in the series that I have great fondness for. If you were to ask me 3 years ago the rating I would give the series, it would probably be maybe like 88, 89. But if I'm looking at the totality of it and also my recent feelings of it these past few years, probably bumps it down to make an 82. I think that's where I'm landing at the moment. Um, Enzo, I know you're a bit higher, so what's your final thoughts on My Hero Academia?
I'm at 90. I think it does 90 is like to me the threshold for when I would call a series a great series. And I think it just reaches that greatness threshold. Given allowing that there are some hiccups, the ending is not the absolute strongest part of the series, but it never lost me the way it lost you. So it doesn't lose a lot of points over the war arc because I think in general the war arc gets more right than it does wrong. And again I take a more holistic view of the series. Even if the ending isn't a 90, I'm going to look at, well, what were the whole 430 chapters and he was able to accomplish. If I weigh it all up and compare it against its competition, uh, I think 90 feels right to me, so I'm pretty comfortable with that. I think he succeeded at way more than he didn't. And I think he, in the end, gave us a series that is going to be looked back on as a really, really important milestone tentpole series in shonen manga. So I'm pretty comfortable with that 90 number. That's where I am.
Nice. Well, feelings are going to be fresh in the series. I'm keen to hear anyone else's point of view, whether you are a long term fan, lover, skeptic, whether you fell off at some point. I feel like this week in particular is going to be the time where people are going to be sharing all their feelings and thoughts on My Hero Academia. So this is us putting that out there as well. Great. Thanks, Enzo, for joining me for speed reading the series at the very end to catch up with this timing. And
Thank you.
thanks, everyone, for listening. And tune in next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.